Hello, everybody, and welcome to Just Two Assholes Fantasy Football Podcast, Episode 5. I am the general manager of Just a League of Assholes, Daniel Powell.
And I am Matt Bowen, just an avid football lover.
And we are here in Episode 5 to bring you a couple things. We are going to go over the Thursday night game, which just happened. We are recording this on Thursday night after the game, so we will do a recap of that game. We're going to talk about some hypothetical trades that we saw on the Fantasy Football subreddit. And then we are going to go over our predictions for our league this week.
Yeah, so let's start with a recap of Thursday Night Football. So the Rams won 38-31 versus the Vikings. This is a really high-scoring game. It seems like something's happened to the Vikings defense. I mean, they gave us so many points last week to the Bills, but I mean, no one can stop the Rams right now. So it might be a little bit of that as well. But Jared Goff was 26 for 33. 465 yards, 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and only got sacked once. So he had an amazing game. In the first half, he had 4 touchdowns alone. So he had a couple bombs, one to Cooper Kupp, which was on my bench, and one to Brandon Cooks. So their offense as a whole, I mean, Todd Gurley had 17 rushes for 83 yards, but he added 4 catches for 73 yards and a touchdown. So, yeah, with a long of 56, so he had a great game. Brandon Cooks ran the ball 1 for 10 yards, but he caught 7 balls for 116 yards, a touchdown. But Cooper Kupp, he was the best fantasy player in this entire game besides Jared Goff. He had 9 receptions for 162 yards and 2 touchdowns. You can't get better than that from a slot receiver. Besides that, Robert Woods had 5 catches for 101 yards and a touchdown. There's just so much offense going with the Rams that right now they're looking unstoppable. And, I mean, their defense did pretty good. They did let up a lot of points, but they still had 4 sacks and a forced fumble and recovery at the end of the game to seal the game.
Yeah, and you mentioned how the Vikings defense kind of folded on this, but so did the Rams defense, the Rams defense is talked about as one of the best defenses in the league, up there with Minnesota and also Jacksonville, but they gave up 31 points this game. This game was really John DeFilippo and Sean McVay showing how an offensive game plan should be called in any game throughout the year. It was really an offensive clinic put on by both play callers, and it was just really a lot of fun to watch. Kirk Cousins had a great game in a loss, absolutely incredible game, bouncing back from last week. He was 36 of 50 for 422 yards and 3 touchdowns, which if you're getting that out of Kirk Cousins, that is absolutely incredible, and he's well worth his contract, which was a little ridiculous. Outside of that, Adam Thielen had 8 receptions for 135 yards. A lot of people thought that because the preseason, Diggs was targeted a lot more than Thielen, people thought that Thielen might not see as many balls this year with Kirk Cousins, but that was proven wrong tonight and basically every week so far this year, as he has been over-targeted compared to Stephon Diggs. Diggs did have 11 receptions in this game for 123 yards. Kyle Rudolph had 5 for 57. I wish he had a touchdown because he was on my team. Laquan Treadwell looks like a good contributor this year. Maybe not first round pick like he was drafted to be, but he had 4 for 47. So even in a loss, this was a really good game for the Vikings.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, the Vikings definitely took advantage of Marcus Peters and Talib being out.
Yeah.
I mean, but when you get outscored 38-31, usually if you score 31 points in the NFL, you're going to win. But just against this high-powered offense for the Rams, something we didn't talk about. What happens to Minnesota's rushing game? Dalvin Cook had 10 carries for 20 yards. The entire team only had 54 yards on 17 carries. I know it's an incredible defensive front for the LA Rams, so not a lot of teams rush on them. But something's going on with Dalvin Cook. He did get a little bit banged up in the game, so they might have rushed him back from that hamstring injury. But Latavius Murray, when he was out, only had 2 rushes for 2 yards. And then R. Thomas, they actually brought in at the end of the game, had 1 rush for 4 yards. So it seemed like at the end of the game, they were just trying to get anything started, trying to get anything momentum besides Kirk Cousins throwing the ball.
Yeah, and the Rams had a fairly balanced game. I mean, Jared Goff threw it 33 times and they rushed 20 times. So in today's NFL, that's a fairly balanced game. Typically, you see teams throw a lot more rush these days. But the Vikings, Dalvin Cook clearly isn't healthy yet, and he was clearly rushed back. They went to a very West Coast style offense tonight with Kirk Cousins throwing a lot of crossing routes and a lot of outs and stuff like that to try and supplement that lack of a run game. I'm kind of shocked that Latavius Murray didn't get a lot more carries in this game, but they were playing from behind basically the whole game and just decided to throw the ball.
Yeah. I mean, when you're behind, the best thing to do is pass the ball, especially versus a great run-stopping defense in the Rams. Besides that, I mean, I think we talked about everything.
Something we didn't talk about is Jared Goff put up 43 fantasy points in our league in this game, and he was sitting on the bench for Witch Hunt No Collusion. And then Cooper Kupp put up, damn near 30 fantasy points, I think, on your bench.
Yeah,
and
more than 30.
We spoke about this in the last episode, that Cooper Kupp was a must-start this week because of the strength of the outside cornerbacks in Minnesota and how he might flourish because he's going to see a lot of off coverage and a lot of linebacker coverage, and that's exactly what happened, and you still kept him on the bench.
Yeah, I mean, we were right about it, but I have no excuse. For some reason, Philip Lindsay's in my flex, and Cooper Kupp's on my bench. Come on, Philip Lindsay this week. If I would have started Cooper Kupp, I would have had 90 points into one game off of 4 players, because Todd Gurley got me 23, Stephon Diggs got me 17.5, and Dan Bailey, he made up for last week. He had me 12 points, so that's pretty good in that. I mean, he kicked 3 field goals, too, so it's not just all extra point. 3 field goals and 2 extra points, so that helps me out.
Yeah, so spoiler alert, I'm probably picking your team to win in our predictions this week just because you're already at 55 points with 3 players played. Like, that's a great handicap to have going into the Sunday games.
Yeah, I'm playing Dick Dangla, so it could be a hard matchup, but yeah, I'm going to pick myself to win this week.
All right, moving on from that, let's go into... So this week we decided to... We've had some trades in our league, but we've pretty much talked about all of them. So what we wanted to do was go on the Fantasy Football subreddit, and we each picked a couple trades that we saw where people were asking for help that we wanted to talk about. So these are hypothetical trades that may or may not have happened, and it could help players in our league and any league who are looking at their players and seeing, hey, what's this guy's value? So the first trade on the docket is Dalvin Cook straight up for Jordan Howard. So I see this, and I guess kind of cheating because we just saw how Dalvin Cook looked on Thursday night. But before that, I actually answered this question on Reddit before the game even started, and I said, look, I would trade Dalvin Cook for Jordan Howard right now, simply because Matt Nagy has come out and said multiple times that Jordan Howard needs more touches. And in their last game, that's exactly what they did. They sort of forced the ball to Jordan Howard more often, whereas Dalvin Cook has clearly been banged up. He tore his ACL last year, so he missed that whole year. He looks like he's a bit of an injury risk every single week.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and like you said, it's kind of cheating for us, but Dalvin Cook really hasn't got anything started, and with the Bears using Tariq Cohen as more of a receiver type back than a straight running back, he's not going to take so many carries away from Jordan Howard, and they're already starting to trend up on him from what you were saying. Yeah, I agreed with this, and this is in a standard league too, so Dalvin Cook doesn't, I mean, neither of them catch the ball really, but I would take Jordan Howard over Dalvin Cook. Just based off the first 3 weeks, Jordan Howard's done tremendously better than Dalvin Cook. You don't know when he's going to be better. And like we were talking about in the recap for the game, he's already still banged up. They brought him back too early. So, so definitely Jordan Howard.
Where do you see Dalvin Cook's value right now then? So let's try and figure out what running back you would trade for Dalvin Cook. Would you trade... If you had Carlos Hyde, would you trade your Carlos Hyde for Dalvin Cook?
No, not with the return or with the emergence of Baker Mayfield. We saw what he did for him last week. He has emerged. He did it through the preseason. He's emerged as the number 1 back. Where in Minnesota they got Latavius Murray. I know he didn't do too much last night, but last year he split the carries really with Jerick McKinnon and did pretty well last year.
Yeah, so where I draw the line, I think Dalvin Cook, who was basically a first or early second round pick in this fantasy draft, I think his value right now is probably right around Kenyon Drake, maybe? Kenyon Drake has had his own struggles this year. The Dolphins have shown a penchant for Frank Gore and just getting him some touches, probably to break more records because Frank Gore is on the cusp of just having a historic career. But I think right now, if I had the choice between Dalvin Cook and Kenyon Drake, I'd be struggling to pick which one I wanted. I would like Dalvin Cook for his possible upside in the future for fantasy football playoffs, but Kenyon Drake, I think I like a little bit more right now for the touches he'll probably receive.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with anything, with all that. I mean, I was trying to think maybe a Matt Breida, because they've had similar seasons so far. Matt Breida's had a lot more yards, but he's banged up as well, and they just lost their starting quarterback. So you don't know how good that offense is going to be. Teams playing the 49ers are going to load the box. They're going to wait to see what C.J. Beathard can do. So I would think that would kind of be a wash.
Yeah, me being a Breida owner right now, I think I would accept a trade for Dalvin Cook for Matt Breida, just because Breida didn't cost me, really. I think I got him with my last pick in the draft. So in the end, when you're thinking about like net points versus pick, Matt Breida would be worth the trade right now. But on the other side of that coin, I could see Matt Breida having a better fantasy season than Dalvin Cook right now, which is really shocking to think about.
Yeah, I mean, once he gets healthy, the 49ers are going to rely on the run game more than they had been. So yeah. All right, so our next trade that we got is Todd Gurley for Jarvis Landry and Leonard Fournette, and I believe this, in a standard, so non-PPR. What are you going on this one?
So in this one, I've said this a couple times, maybe not on this podcast, but I've said it on the fantasy football subreddit, and basically, I think that in 90% of the trades with Gurley involved, the team that gets Gurley is winning that trade. And I think that's the case in this one as well. Fournette and Landry... Fournette has been banged up again, much like Dalvin Cook, and he's shown a penchant throughout his career so far of being banged up and missing quite a few weeks every season. He already missed last week. He missed a few weeks last year. Jarvis Landry has been inconsistent so far, but that was with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback. Baker Mayfield, I think, brings his value up quite a bit, but we don't know how much without seeing them in a full game together.
Yeah.
So I would probably stick with Gurley over Fournette and Landry.
Yeah, I agree with you again. I mean, I'm kind of biased because I did draft Todd Gurley number 1 overall, but there's a reason he's going number 1 overall. I mean, he's in an electric offense. You see that he didn't break 100 yards in the rushing game, but he's still got 70, 80 yards in the passing game and a passing touchdown.
Yeah, no one knew that he was such a gifted pass catcher until Sean McVay showed up.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff Fisher's not going to throw a lot of balls to the running back. So, but yeah, I would definitely take this. Fournette's been banged up. Landry, his main game is, if this was a PPR, Landry's value would definitely go up because he is good for those small or short catches across the middle or on the outside. He's more of a kind of momentum shifter.
Yes.
Those small plays, he'll get you the third down, he'll get you the third down conversion. And if this was a PPR, that would be better for Landry, but it'd also be a lot better for Gurley in his trades. And like you said, Fournette's already been banged up this year. He really hasn't looked the same, honestly. He has lost some weight, but throughout the offseason since last year, but it looks like that might have hurt his durability in the game. So, yeah, I would definitely deny this trade, stick with Todd Gurley, and then, just see if you can get better than Landry and Fournette. I kind of had a similar trade to this in our league, which I denied. One of the guys in our league said, hey, Patrick Mahomes is open. Who wants him? So I was like, all right. I was just messing with him to see what he wanted for him. And he wanted Todd Gurley and Stephon Diggs for Mahomes, and I believe it was DeAndre Hopkins. And for me, it was just, no, you're not getting Gurley. You don't know when Mahomes is going to go down. He's not going to fall off a cliff, but his value is going to go down a little bit. He can't sustain 13 touchdowns and 0 picks throughout the entire season. If he can, hell yeah. But I wasn't comfortable making that trade.
Yeah, another fairly hard and steadfast rule that I have in fantasy football is you almost never I say almost never because there are exceptions, but you almost never want to trade a good skill position player for a quarterback because the difference between the number 1 overall quarterback and the number 10 overall quarterback in any given fantasy season is very, very different than the difference between the number 1 overall wide receiver and the number 10, or the number 1 overall running back and the number 10. A number 1 overall quarterback is going to be around 330 fantasy points, whereas the number 10 is going to be around 260. You're looking at a difference of 60 fantasy points over the course of 16 weeks. So that's not a huge difference, whereas the value with wide receivers and running backs becomes much, much different. So I would almost never trade a skill position player, especially a good one, for a fantasy quarterback, even if they are as hot as Patrick Mahomes is. Now, this same user had another trade on this post that said someone offered him Alvin Kamara and Juju Smith-Schuster for his Todd Gurley. Now, I said that in 90% of cases, the person getting Todd Gurley wins the trade. This is the exception. This is the other 10%. Alvin Kamara is obviously one of the clear focal points in that Saints offense. He had 33 touches in that last game.
Yep.
That is absolutely absurd. He catches everything. He gets plenty of rushes. Ingram coming back worries me a little bit, but it's not going to take away from his pass-catching production whatsoever. And Juju Smith-Schuster looks a lot like Big Ben's favorite target and might be taking over that number 1 wide receiver position from Antonio Brown. So this is a trade for Gurley that I would probably accept. If someone offered me Kamara and Juju for my Gurley, I think I'd hit yes.
Yeah, and you got to go, and good thing he posted what his team was as well. So his wide receivers, he had Devontae Adams, Allen Robertson, Doug Baldwin, Larry Fitzgerald. It says Williams. I don't know.
Mike Williams, I'm guessing?
Possibly, and then Cole, so Keenan Cole from the Jaguars. So yes, he definitely needs wide receiver help. Having Devontae Adams and Juju, that's solid. That is just solid. You shouldn't have to touch that all year. And as far as his running backs, he had Todd Gurley, Alex Collins, Kenyon Drake, and then Eckler out of Los Angeles Chargers. So yeah, I mean, I would agree. Kamara for Gurley. You definitely take Gurley over Kamara, but with the added Juju in there, it looks like Ben is favoring Juju. It might be a little bit of the Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen effect, where the top cornerback is going against Brown. So Ben has to throw it to the number 2 guy, which is actually performing like a number 1. They have 2 number 1s on that team.
Yes.
Good job, Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would lean with this trade too, and Juju, he's just so electric. That's why I drafted him in most of my leagues when I could grab him. And Kamara, I think his value is going to go up possibly when Mark Ingram comes back.
Yeah, so if anyone wants Gurley in our league, just offer Matt an equal value of Alvin Kamara and Juju Smith-Schuster.
I guess I have to take it now.
Yeah, and I think you'll get your guy. You'll get Todd Gurley. Moving on from that, our next trade on the docket is someone posted that they were offered Aaron Jones for their O.J. Howard. Now, here's another one I'll say, a hard and steadfast rule for me, is that if someone offers you a decent skill position player, especially on a good offense like Green Bay, for a tight end that isn't named Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, or Zach Ertz, you accept it, no matter what. I don't care who your tight end is or how good they're performing right now. You trade them for a decent skill position player on a good offense.
Yeah, I mean, you can't deny that. Especially, this guy posted, he's got 2 other tight ends on his team. It's not like he's the only tight end. So there's a reason he's trying to move O.J. Howard. O.J. Howard. He's already got Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron on his team. Why would you have 2 from the Colts? Who knows? But yeah, definitely take this. Aaron Jones is gonna get. He should get better throughout the year. Being on Green Bay, they have to focus. Opposing defenses have to focus so much on the passing game that those running lanes are there, and their offensive line is pretty good. They've kept Rodgers pretty clean. So as long as Aaron Jones is coming back healthy, yes, definitely make that trade for Aaron Jones.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, that next one we got. So this one's a 2-for-2 swap. It's Carlos Hyde and Sony Michel trading for Kenyon Drake and Devontae Freeman. This one's interesting. I mean, it really goes down to Hyde Freeman, okay, who do you take over there? And then Sony Michel and Kenyon Drake. It's kind of a two-part trade. If you say, okay, I like Carlos Hyde more than Devontae Freeman, who do you like more, Sony Michel or Kenyon Drake? But if you answer the question Hyde more on that first one, you don't even go to the second one.
Yeah.
Because I don't like New England running backs, and like you said before the podcast, not named James White.
Yeah.
I mean, Rex Burkhead was drafted in a lot of leagues in the first 6 rounds. He's on the IR already. I know that's injury, but before that, he didn't do anything.
Nope.
I was one of the people that drafted him. He did nothing. So Sony Michel, he was injured. He's a rookie. And in that New England offense, you just cannot rely on him. He has to put up before you can do anything trading for him. And obviously, the person trading him with Hyde is trying to make that deal a little less by adding Michel in there.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely want to trade Sony Michel for any value I can get, and if that value is Kenyon Drake, I'm feeling pretty good about that. Devonta Freeman has been banged up, but he was also drafted a lot higher than Carlos Hyde, and is in a better overall offense and has performed better in the past. But at the same time, he is banged up, and Carlos Hyde has shown that he's probably going to be a very, very good fantasy running back this year. They're running him 20-plus times a game right now. Baker Mayfield is coming into that offense, and he's going to open up a lot of running lanes with his arm. So this one's kind of tough for me. I think I would prefer having Freeman and Drake over Hyde and Sonny, because if Sony Michel fumbles the ball once, I would bet a lot of money that Bill Belichick takes him out of the game and then doesn't start him for another 3 weeks. Yeah. And he's a good pass-catching back, but James White has been the pass-catching back there for 3 seasons now and has done really, really well every single year.
Yeah, it kind of hurts that this guy didn't put the rest of his roster down in this trade. It all comes down to, okay, are you going to have to start both of these players that you're trading for?
Yes.
When it comes down to that, definitely take Kenyon Drake and Devontae Freeman. But if you don't have to use Sony Michel and you have belief in Cleveland's offense, I would take Carlos Hyde and Sony Michel if you don't have to start Michel. Because I would drop Michel in this trade if you're staying with him and try and get someone better off free agency. So we're a little different on this one. But yeah, I would stick with the Hyde and Michel for this one.
Michel's just, he's such a wild card, but I really, really like Carlos Hyde this year. And I drafted him, so that shows you how much. I drafted him 2 rounds before he was supposed to go by ESPN rankings. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, the next one is kind of funny. All right, so Fitz Magic for Josh Gordon. What are you looking for this one?
This is a tough one because I said earlier that you should never trade a skill position player on a good offense for a quarterback. But Ryan Fitzpatrick has been absolutely killing it and is the number 1 overall fantasy quarterback and maybe the number 1 overall fantasy player so far this year. And Josh Gordon is, again, he has a history of messing up, and he's now on a Bill Belichick coach team, so you have no idea what he's going to do. So if I'm the Josh Gordon owner and my wide receiver core is pretty good to decent, somewhere in that range, and I need a quarterback, I actually don't hate this trade because Ryan Fitzpatrick adds a lot of value to your team, and Josh Gordon, you're really just escaping a gamble. But also for the Fitzpatrick side, if your wide receiver core isn't that great and you happen to have Ryan Fitzpatrick and, say, Ben Roethlisberger or just some other decent fantasy quarterback, you can make this trade and be happy. So I think both ways in the right context, either player can win this trade.
Yeah, it's hard when people post this stuff on. So we're getting these from Reddit. It's hard when they post it and don't list the rest of their team. You'd like to think if someone is willing to get rid of Fitzmagic that they do have a pretty decent quarterback on their bench. So that leans to what you were just saying. If they can afford to get rid of Fitzmagic and not have too much of a drop-off on their quarterback, yes, definitely take Josh Gordon. Just the potential of him in that offense if he can pick it up. But if not, and he's just, for the other team, so this trade was accepted. And so the post was that this was accepted and this trade was kind of just, it blew up their league. Everyone, all the owners were on every side. They didn't know who won. So they posted to Reddit to see who won the trade. And like I said, we just don't know the teams. Obviously, the guy who traded Josh Gordon needed a quarterback, and you would like to think that his wide receivers
We're decent.
were decent if you're giving up Josh Gordon, which he probably drafted. So I think this is an even trade as long as the Fitzmagic owner currently has a pretty good quarterback on his bench and the current owner of Josh Gordon has a all right wide receiver core. So I think this trade worked out pretty even.
Yeah, and so me being a Fitzpatrick owner right now, I got him off free agency because I needed someone to start in place of Phillip Rivers when he was going against a good defense. Like, I think I also own Josh Gordon in this league, so it's tough to say, but I think I personally would trade Fitzpatrick for Josh Gordon because I have Phillip Rivers.
Yeah.
If I didn't have Phillip Rivers, I would probably say no. Say I had like an Alex Smith on my bench or a Marcus Mariota or something like that. I think I would probably stick with Fitz and not take the gamble on Josh Gordon here.
Yeah. So this was a good trade, and like you said, this is one of those instances where it might be okay to trade a quarterback for a wide receiver or running back. The next one we got, this one's kind of tough. So it's 3 players for 2 players. So the guy trading 2 players away potentially has to have an open bench slot for this even to work. But so Marvin Jones, Josh Gordon, Deion Lewis traded for McCaffrey and Kenny Galladay. I know that you've gotten McCaffrey in our league in a trade. His value for that, he is that offense. They kind of turned away from him in the pass-catching game this last game, and Cam Newton actually got it rolling. But he's going to get so many touches in that offense, and Kenny Galladay is actually looking like a pretty solid number 2 wide receiver on the Lions defense, or the Lions offense. It all depends if this is standard in PPR, and it hurt that they didn't say that in this trade. But I'm kind of leaning toward the McCaffrey and Galladay on this trade.
Yeah, for me, this is a pretty easy one. If you can trade away Marvin Jones, Josh Gordon, Deion Lewis, and get Christian McCaffrey, you do it. I would trade all 3 of them for Christian McCaffrey alone, honestly. Getting Kenny Galladay is a nice plus.
Yeah.
Galladay has been really good so far. I think it could be fool's gold, and it could be chasing points, because I do think Marvin Jones is going to stay the number 2 fantasy wide receiver in that league for the rest of the season. He's just too good of a deep threat to not put up those fantasy points. However, Christian McCaffrey is just on another tier of player. He is going to be a top 5 running back this year, in my opinion. That's why I traded for him in our league. When I was offered him for Le'Veon Bell, basically, knowing Bell wasn't going to be back for a while and I could get Christian McCaffrey, it didn't even matter who else he wanted for my team. I was getting Christian McCaffrey in that trade.
Yeah, and I mean, it worked out for you last week.
Yeah, so like, despite the fact that he didn't catch any balls, he had 180 rushing yards.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe he didn't catch any passes, but he still had 18 fantasy points on rushing yards alone.
Yeah, he didn't need to, honestly. So that wraps it up as far as our Reddit trades that we were looking at. So we're going to move into this week's matchups. So the first one we're going to go with is my team won Tyreek Hill versus the Dick Dangler. So far, after Thursday night's games, the score is 52.5 for me. I got that with Todd Gurley, got 23 points in our league. Stephon Diggs got 17.5, and then Dayan Bailey helped me out with 12 points coming up from the kicker. Dick Dangler didn't have anyone playing in this game, so he has 0 points. So right now it looks crazy, like, oh, you're going to win, you're up 50 points, but he didn't play anyone. So we'll see. The rest of my team looks like, so I got Matthew Stafford for quarterback. I picked up Baker Mayfield off the waivers, but I'm going to stick with Matthew Stafford playing against that Dallas defense. I really don't trust Dallas's defense right now, especially because Sean Lee is going to be out. So that's going to hurt their pass coverage. I said I got Todd Gurley, got me 23 points. Now I got Lamar Miller. They're playing Indianapolis. Indy, their defense has been up and down this year. It really has. And Lamar Miller, when Deshaun Watson is actually playing good and is actually rolling, that helps open Lamar Miller because he is a pass-catching running back as well out of the backfield. So I'm sticking with him. Stephon Diggs got me 17.5. And then I got Tyreek Hill, which people were trying to trade me for him, and I'm not getting rid of him. I know that he is touchdown dependent on offense, but he is going to get touchdowns in that offense. they're spreading the ball around so much in that offense, so he could only get one touchdown. But hey, that's one touchdown and at least 80 yards. He's averaging that a game this year. For tight end, I got Trey Burton or Tampa Bay, pretty solid. Philip Lindsay shouldn't be in my flex, and I actually put in a waiver claim for Quincy Enunwa. Or am I saying that way? Enunwa.
Yeah.
Because I have Robbie Anderson on my bench, and I put in a claim to drop him and pick up Enunwa. So if I pick up him, he's going to be pretty good on my bench. I'm not going to start him, though, because they're playing Jacksonville. I think Philip Lindsay for Kansas City, they don't have a great defense, Kansas City, so Philip Lindsay should get a lot of touches in that game. I had the Browns defense versus Oakland. Oakland they haven't done anything. Their offense hasn't been rolling at all this year. So I'm sticking with the Browns defense. They did pretty good last week against the Jets, and I see the Jets potentially having a better offense than Oakland right now. And then Dan Bailey, he got me 0 points last week, but he came up and got me 12 points this week, so I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah, and I'm finding it tough to find a scenario in which you lose this game after this Thursday night game. Having 52.5 points from 3 players is just incredible. And looking at Dick Dangla's team, he is 2-1. He has performed really, really good so far. But he's starting Tom Brady at quarterback, which Tom Brady has not looked like himself this year. And he's playing against Miami, who has had a solid defense so far. Miami, your team, has looked really, really good on the defensive side of the ball. Now, Alvin Kamara at his running back spot, Alvin Kamara could put up 40 fantasy points this week and somehow bring Dick Dangla back into this, because that's just how good Alvin Kamara is as a football player and as a fantasy football player. But I'd say the odds of that are fairly slim. Let's see, Kamara so far, so 37.5 in week 1. If he has a week like that, where he has 2 touchdowns, and he catches a tons of balls, and he runs it really well, he could claw his way back into this game. But moving on his team, Alfred Morris at RB2 is questionable, so is Matt Breida. They're both a little banged up. It's really just whichever one gets a touchdown, which one of them should, but whichever one does. Alfred Morris got it last week, so if he gets a touchdown again this week and puts up another 12 to 15 fantasy points, that's pretty decent out of him. Devontae Adams, you would, I think, need at least 2 touchdown catches from him, or like a 120-yard game plus a touchdown to kind of claw your way back into this. Emmanuel Sanders had a pretty good week last week. Case Keenum loves his slot wide receivers, but you would need him to have a huge game still. The biggest problem on his team is he has TJ Yeldon in his flex. Fournette looks like he's going to be back this week. I think it might be confirmed that he is starting this week. So TJ Yeldon probably isn't rosterable in his flex. And on his bench, he doesn't have a lot of great options. You could hope Jordy Nelson comes out and has a huge game like he did last week, or even a decent game. But outside of last week, Jordy Nelson hasn't looked like all that great of a wide receiver on that Oakland offense, despite the fact that I love Jordy Nelson. Jaguars defense against the Jets, this could be huge for him. If they have, say 2 or 3 picks and they have a touchdown on defense, they could put up 20 fantasy points and just have a monster game. Sebastian Janikowski at kicker, I think you're looking at 8 to 10 fantasy points every week from Sebastian Janikowski. So I'm finding it tough for Dick Dangla to claw his way back into this one. I'm going to pick your team because outside of a couple miracles from Dick Dangla's roster, I think you have this one all but sealed up right now.
Yeah, his roster is looking a little worrisome right now. Yeah, to go back on TJ Yeldon, he is injured as well. He was banged up in that last game. They kind of turned to Grant at the end of that game last week. He's injured with his ankle, and with Fournette coming back, that definitely hurts him. Like you said, he's got Alex Smith on his bench, which he's on a bye week, so that kind of forces. Usually you don't say that, but forcing him to play Tom Brady. He doesn't have an option. And I wouldn't drop Alex Smith the way he's been playing so far to try and pick up another one. I wouldn't put him on free agency. So, I'm going to pick my team as well. So, hopefully we stick with it and either Brady doesn't do so good or Alvin Kamara doesn't. So, it's going to be close, though. For projected, Dick Dangla is projected for 99 points, and I am for 114 already after tonight's game. So, that went up a little bit. At first, I was only projected to win at 5 points, but after tonight's game, I'm projected to pretty much win by 15 right now. So we'll see if that sticks to it. That's all we got for this game.
Yeah, moving on to my game. So Josh Gordon's Rehab Friends, my team versus Sack Lives Matter. So right now the score is 7.5 for me to 18.5 for Sack Lives Matter because he had Robert Woods playing. Robert Woods had a horrible first half where he only had 3 catches and then had a huge catch for a touchdown and a couple other catches in the second half and got 18.5 fantasy points. That puts me in a pretty big hole right now that I am not a huge fan of. I'm obviously still going to pick my team for a couple of reasons. Phillip Rivers at quarterback against the Niners. So we've seen in the first 3 games of the year, the Niners cannot stop the pass, and I don't expect that to change this week against the Chargers, who have just had an amazing offense so far. Melvin Gordon has shown that he can catch a lot of balls for being a running back that no one really thought was a pass-catching back. And then on top of that, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are a great 1-2 punch at wide receiver, and Phillip Rivers is a damn near Hall of Fame, if not Hall of Fame, quarterback. Jordan Howard at running back against Tampa Bay. I expect this to be like all Tampa Bay games and be a shootout and just really high scoring. So I'm hoping Josh Gordon just gets a couple 1 to 2 yard carries on the goal line for a touchdown.
Jordan Howard.
Yeah, Jordan Howard. My apologies. Carlos Hyde versus Oakland. Carlos Hyde, we've talked about him already. He's seeing 20 touches a game. I think he's good for 20 carries, 80 yards, and maybe a touchdown. Mike Evans against Chicago. Yet again, I expect this to be a shootout. And while Chicago's cornerbacks and pass rush do worry me a little bit, Mike Evans is one of the best wide receivers in the game right now. And he's put up, I think, at least 10 to 15 fantasy points every single game so far. Let's double check that. Yeah, 21, 17, and 22. So he's put up at least 17 fantasy points every game so far. I dropped Quincy Enunwa, who you were targeting to pick up Tyler Boyd, who I'm starting at wide receiver 2, because this is another game I expect to be a shootout. Every game with Atlanta this year is going to be a shootout because they're missing 2 safeties and a linebacker, I think. So their secondary is hurt quite a bit, and Tyler Boyd has really, really looked good because teams are really devout to double covering A.J. Green every single game and just letting Tyler Boyd do all the damage over the middle. He's had 18 and 22 fantasy points in the past 2 weeks. I'm expecting 10 to 12 out of him this week. He may not see a touchdown, but he should see quite a few catches and 60 to 80 receiving yards. I had Kyle Rudolph at tight end, who got me 7.5 points this week. He's someone I traded for in the past couple days. 7.5 points out of my tight end spot. It's not exactly what I was hoping for. I was hoping he'd get a touchdown in this shootout of a game, but he didn't. 7.5, I'll take it. Matt Breida at running back has been confirmed healthy, and he was a full participant in practice this week, so I'm expecting him to get most of the carries in that San Francisco backfield. So hopefully I can get 10 fantasy points out of him. The Saints defense against the Giants, I picked them up off waivers because I do not believe in the Giants defense whatsoever, and the Saints defense has looked like a shell of its former self, but I'm expecting them at some week to get back to their old ways. Marshawn Lattimore has to find his groove again, and I think he can do that against the Giants defense, offense, sorry. Eli Manning just isn't a good quarterback anymore, and I think he's going to throw a couple picks. And then Matt Prater at kicker, just a solid overall kicker.
Yeah, I mean, between these two teams, you have players on the same team, like A.J. Green versus Tyler Boyd. You have Saquon Barkley against the Saints defense who's playing the Giants. So, yeah, this is going to be a good matchup. To go off to some things you said, so Tyler Boyd, so Atlanta has lost their starting middle linebacker and both starting safeties. So, like you said, teams have to double cover A.J. Green. So that's going to leave just a lot of not big name, big impact players trying to cover the rest of Cincinnati's offense. So I do think that Tyler Boyd is going to have a big week this week. So to go down on Sack Lives Matter, he has Russell Wilson playing Arizona. Arizona hasn't done much. They did show up a little bit versus Mitchell Trubisky, but Russell Wilson is a lot better quarterback than Mitchell Trubisky, so I think he'll have a good game.
Plus Doug Baldwin's back this week.
Yes, that is going to help. He was healthy-ish. He felt he was healthy enough to play last week, but the trainers didn't, so this week he's hoping that the trainers sign off on him to play. That would definitely help that offense and Russell Wilson a lot this week. Saquon Barkley, he's been solid this year and against New Orleans defense. So It all depends if the Saints if the defense shows up in this game. Because, I mean, Saquon Barkley, he hasn't been that superstar running back so far that he's projected to be. But, so, he had 19 points, 17 points, 19.5 points. That is decent. That is top, I don't know if it's top 10. Yeah, he's for the rank for his position, he's 5. He's averaging 18.5 a game. So, yeah, he should have a big week against New Orleans. You saw how high scoring a game that was versus Atlanta and New Orleans last week. So I am expecting, at least in the running game, I do think that Matt Ryan's a lot better quarterback than Eli Manning at this point in their careers. So this is a really good game for the Saints to turn around. They're not going to have any excuses besides Saquon Barkley. Evan Ingram's a little bit banged up. And besides Saquon Barkley and Odell, they really don't have anyone else on their offense to worry about. So this Saints D should step up in this game. Bilal Powell, that's the real question. I'm a little biased because I'm a Dolphins fan. I don't like the Jets. But he has turned around to be really their go-to guy in their backfield, which is helping Sam Darnold. But they're playing the Jacksonville Jaguars. Not a lot of teams put up big rushing games for Jacksonville, so I think that's kind of a bad matchup for him. We already talked about A.J. Green getting double covered for Atlanta. He could have a big game. I mean, he came out and had 3 touchdowns in the first half, so anything can happen in a game so far this year. But yeah, he's going to get double covered. I see for Andy Dalton to try and he's still going to throw balls towards his way, but I could see Tyler Boyd having more catches, maybe not more targets, but more catches in this game than A.J. Green. Marvin Jones, Detroit, they got a good offense, a solid offense. It's not great, but a solid offense, and they're playing Dallas, which is without Sean Lee, so that should help Marvin Jones. David Njoku, it all depends on the Mayfield effect. Really, he hasn't done too much this year at all. They are playing Oakland, which Mike Gesicki for the Dolphins actually did pretty good against them last week. He dropped a touchdown in the end zone, so David Njoku should have a pretty solid week this week. Robert Woods, yeah, you already talked about him. He exploded. Didn't do anything in the first half, but had a really long touchdown pass that helped him. I think he only had 5 catches, but he had over 100 yards. Let's see what he had.
And a touchdown, yeah. 5 catches, 101 yards, and a touchdown.
Yeah, so if he didn't have that one long, I think it was like an 80-yard touchdown pass.
Something like that.
That he wouldn't have done much at all in this game. But, hey, Jared Goff did his thing tonight. Titans defense versus Philadelphia, I do not think that's a good matchup at all.
No.
And then Will Lutz for New Orleans versus the Giants, that is really good. You know they're going to score a lot of points. And versus the Giants, too, that's not a great, really, defense for their offense to worry about. So he should have a pretty decent week. It's hard, but yeah, I think I'm going Josh Gordon as well, just because I don't believe in Bilal Powell as much. A.J. Green's going to get double covered, and Saquon Barkley, Eli Manning might not be able to do anything in this game, so the Saints defense could hone in on preventing, pretty much daring Eli Manning to beat them. They could stack the box and say, okay, Saquon Barkley is not going to beat us. We're going to have Lattimore one-on-one, or at least Lattimore with a safety over the top on Odell, and just say, all right, Eli, let's see what you got. So I do not like that matchup. I already said I don't like the Titans as well for this. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Rehab as well.
All right, moving on to the Lucky Neckbeards versus Team Cortez. Team Cortez is the luckiest team in the league so far. Has very, very few points scored against him, so he is currently 3-0. But he's currently ahead 25.5 to 23. Team Cortez did have 2 players play on Thursday night. He had Brandon Cooks at 21.5 points, and the Rams defense got him 4 points. The Rams defense getting 4 points while getting 31 points scored against them. That's just how good this defense is. I'm kind of surprised he started them. I'm guessing he started them because he didn't want to drop them or anyone else for another defense. 4 points from your defense isn't stellar, but it's not negative points, which we'll talk about later in another matchup. Deshaun Watson at quarterback against Indy. Darius Leonard on the pass rush has been incredible this year, actually. He's looking like the steal of this past draft. So Deshaun Watson hasn't looked like himself completely this year. He did kind of put it together last week with 24 fantasy points and 22 before that. So he's looking like he could be getting it back together and that offense could be rolling again. But I don't hate Indianapolis' defense in this matchup, not to mention it is a divisional matchup, which means it could be a lot more low scoring than most games normally are, just because these teams know each other so well. David Johnson at running back against Seattle, I expect David Johnson to bounce back really, really hard at some point this season, and it could be very, very soon. Seattle's defense isn't nearly as good as they have been in past years. They're missing a lot of pieces that they had. This could be the week that David Johnson, if Mike McCoy gets his head on straight and starts getting him at least 20 touches a game, this could be a big week for David Johnson.
It does help him, too. Sorry to cut you off. It does help him that Josh Rosen is going to start. So they should is the word, rely on David Johnson more to kind of ease Josh Rosen into this game, at least in the first quarter, before they start relying on him. So, yes, I like this matchup for David Johnson.
Yeah, he's starting Marshawn Lynch at RB2, who has been solid 11, 13, and 15 fantasy points so far. So he's looking like he's going to get you at least 10 points per fantasy game. He's aces on the goal line. So if Oakland can find a way to get near the end zone, they're going to give it to Marshawn Lynch and just hope that he gets a touchdown out of it. I like him this week. Brandon Cooks, 21.5 points. Brandon Cooks is the most underrated wide receiver in the league, I think. A lot of NFL fans talk a lot of crap about him, saying how he's only played with Hall of Fame quarterbacks. It's the only reason he was ever any good. But he's played with Jared Goff now, who it's way too early to say if he's going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback. He looks the part, at least on Thursday night. But Brandon Cooks is just a good wide receiver. So 21.5 points is pretty solid. I mean, very, very solid from him. Michael Crabtree at wide receiver 2 hasn't been great so far this year. He's averaging, 9.2 points per fantasy week. I think a lot of people were thinking he was going to be a lot better than he's been so far, but it's just because John Brown has taken over that wide receiver 1 spot in Baltimore. So unless Crabtree can do his thing and really, really catch a lot of passes, he needs a lot of targets in order to do well, but John Brown has been hogging those targets so far. Rob Gronkowski at tight end is always a boom threat. He could go off for 25 fantasy points any week. It doesn't matter what the matchup is, really. We've spoken about how Miami's defense is much improved this year, but if Rob Gronkowski goes off for 20 fantasy points, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Chris Carson has really, really put it together. He's starting him in the flex. He had 19 fantasy points last week. Seattle really got back to pounding the rock. Pete Carroll really, really likes to run the ball. So Chris Carson could have another big week, especially against that Arizona defense that hasn't looked that good. And Seattle could just be up by 21 at halftime and run the ball the entire second half. The Rams defense got him 4 points. We already spoke about that. And then he's got Mason Crosby at kicker against Buffalo. Green Bay should be in field goal range basically this entire game.
Yeah.
So Mason Crosby could put up 15 fantasy points, and I wouldn't be surprised this week.
Yeah, as far as upgrades, as far as his bench goes, the only questionable person that he's starting, I guess, would be Michael Crabtree. So he's got Larry Fitzgerald on his bench, Doug Baldwin, Deshaun Jackson, Blake Borders, which doesn't go into this conversation, and then Will Dissly. I would be looking at Doug Baldwin, maybe.
Yeah.
Either him or Larry, because you know Larry's going to get the touches. He's going to get the catches.
I'd be starting Doug Baldwin here, I think. Absolutely.
Yeah, so if you're listening, Team Cortez, which you said you were, you have been, move Doug Baldwin into your wide receiver position. So to talk about the lucky neckbeard. So you got Andrew Luck versus Houston. Houston hasn't done much this year. They've kind of been a disappointment this year so far. A lot of teams were looking for them to compete. I'm not saying win, but to compete with Jacksonville in that division for that. But Andrew Luck should have a good matchup. J.J. Watt looks like he might be back.
Yeah, he had 2 sacks last week.
He's been destroying games. And it comes back to week 1, that second half, he really turned it on. And then week 2, he had a pretty good game. And then, like you said, 2 sacks last week. So hopefully they could protect Andrew Luck away from J.J. Watt. But you know he's going to get at least 1 sack in this game. Melvin Gordon, we talked about him a little bit. He has actually been catching the ball so much this year. And against San Francisco, that defense is not going to be they haven't been good all year, really. And Melvin Gordon should look to explode this week. He's averaging 21 points a game. That is amazing for a running back.
It's incredible.
Really. 22.5 points, 26 points, and then 15 points. and he's gotten 2 touchdowns on the year. These are his rushing stats, but still 15 rushes for 80 yards and a touchdown last week. That is amazing. And still with catching a lot of balls out of the backfield, he is a good player. I mean, this running back is the strength of this team, Lucky Neckbeards. He's got Melvin Gordon, James Conner, and then Leonard Fournette in his slot. And with Fournette being healthy against the Jets defense, which has kind of been stingy this year in the rushing game, but they did let up a 100-yard rushing versus Miami. So Leonard Fournette should have a pretty decent game this week. Jump back to James Conner, who's starting in his running back position. He's been decent. He's been kind of a fill-in player for Le'Veon Bell, which is hard to say. But that offense has just been so good in the passing games that teams have to kind of hold back and not rush the quarterback or fill up the rushing lanes as much. So James Conner does have space to run. He's been hitting the holes, and he's been catching balls out of the backfield. Versus Baltimore, which they've let up some points this year, but I like the matchup for James Conner so far this week. Adam Thielen got 23 points. It's looking like that he's getting, like you said earlier, he's getting more targets than Stephon Diggs is. So maybe that's because Stephon Diggs is going against the better cornerback on the teams, but I don't know. Adam Thielen has been exploding this year. So opposing defenses might, after I know he's already played, but going throughout the season, they might look to put the number 1 cornerback on him instead of Diggs. I mean, it's pick your poison out of those two.
Double-edged sword there, yeah.
So, but he has been Kirk Cousins and him have amazing chemistry. He's got 23 points. Calvin Ridley, he picked him up, off the waivers wire, so he's actually relying on him a lot for starting him. And they're playing Cincinnati, so I do like that matchup. Matt Ryan has looked great these last 2 weeks, so Calvin Ridley should have a pretty good game. Eric Ebron, he's touchdown dependent. I mean, he's been sharing catches with Eric Doyle. Let's see what he's got so far this year.
Jack Doyle,
sorry, yeah. Eric. So he's averaging 9 points a game, which, okay, that's pretty decent. But last week, 5 catches for 33 yards, no touchdowns, 5.5. So he's really touchdown dependent in this offense. But playing against Houston, I see he could maybe get 6 to 8 points in this. But if he scores, he could get up to 15 points this week. So it really touchdown dependent for him. We talked about Leonard Fournette. He should have a good game against the Jets. It kind of helps that the Rams only got 4 points for Cortez, but the Ravens defense is playing Pittsburgh. I know it's a divisional game, but no one has been able to slow Pittsburgh this year.
And this is at home for Pittsburgh, and we know, we've talked about it many times.
Home Ben.
Ben Roethlisberger splits versus home and road. He is much, much better at home.
Yeah, so I don't like this matchup for the Ravens defense, but he does not have another defense on his team, so he's kind of stuck with what he's got. And then Matt Bryant for Atlanta, going against Cincinnati, he's going to have at least 8 points in this matchup. So it's hard. I'm going to have to go Cortez in this, and I'm going out on a limb, but I'm just kind of trusting Deshaun Watson. I mean, Lucky Neckbeards, if his running backs go off like they're supposed to, he will win this game.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to pick the Lucky Neckbeards in this matchup for a couple of reasons. One, Team Cortez has gotten really, really lucky so far, and Lucky Neckbeards, his team only put up something like 75 points last week, but it is a very, very good team. And if everyone performs as they're supposed to, Lucky Neckbeards wins this game, I think. The biggest weakness I see here, honestly, is Calvin Ridley. And the only reason I say that is because I think it's chasing points. Julio Jones was banged up a little bit with a calf strain, and we've seen in the past couple seasons that when Julio Jones has a minor injury, as Atlanta always reports it, their number 2 wide receiver, Mohamed Sanu, owners the past couple years know this, blows up. So, if Julio Jones is completely healthy this week, I don't think Calvin Ridley sees nearly as many targets as he saw last week, and he definitely doesn't see the touchdown numbers he saw last week. I would honestly, if I was Lucky Neckbeards, I would start Kenny Stills over Calvin Ridley here, because if Miami has any hope of winning this game, Kenny Stills needs to be fed the ball. Yeah. So I would start Kenny Stills here over Calvin Ridley, and I hope he makes that switch, but even without making that switch, I'm still picking Lucky Neckbeards here.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of hurts too because he had Kirk Cousins on his bench. And against the Rams, you would think that I don't know. With their top corners being out, I don't understand how you don't start him. Maybe he didn't hear the news that the top corners were out, but he got 35 points on the bench. Maybe his performance last week scared him a lot because they lost to the Bills. They got blown out. He had 5 turnovers, so maybe that scared him. But I mean, Andrew Luck is solid, but with Kirk Cousins, the offense, how they've been besides last week, I would have started Kirk Cousins, but hey, I'm the guy who had Cooper Kupp on my bench, so I can't really talk this week.
Yeah, so, I mean, this comes down to don't bench your stars just because they had a bad week. And then with Calvin Ridley, don't start your not stars just because they had a good week.
Yeah.
That's not a great way to play fantasy football because you're going against the consistency of each player.
Yep. All right, we're going to move on to the next game. So this is Stairway to Evans versus Witch Hunt No Collusion. So Stairway to Evans, he started off in the hole. He is minus 8.5 points because he had the Vikings defense. It's kind of hard to put in the defense playing the Rams. I mean, any defense versus the Rams have not done anything so far this year. So minus 8.5 points. He's got Ben, which we talked about, home Ben. So he should show up. I'm looking for him to get at least 28 points this week. He's got Peyton Barber, which doesn't look good for Tampa Bay versus Chicago. Let's see who he's got on his bench. Joe Mixon.
Who's out.
Yeah, and then Adrian Peterson, who's on a bye. So he's kind of forced to play Peyton Barber. So good luck to him. And then he's got Buck Allen versus Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, their defense really has been good this year. They haven't stopped offenses so far. So Buck Allen could have a big game. We did talk a little bit on the last podcast about him being touchdown dependent, but he is really the goal line back. He's going to get those goal line touches. So as long as they're within the 5, he should get at least 1 touchdown in this game. So he should probably get maybe 12, 14 points. So that's pretty decent. Julio Jones, we talked about how he is healthier than he was last week. Playing Cincinnati, so looking for him to have a bigger week than he did last week. And then Michael Thomas versus the Giants. He's going to go off again. He's going to get at least 12 catches.
Who's going to cover him? Eli Apple? I mean, Michael Thomas is going to go off.
Yeah, he's going to have an amazing week this week. Jimmy Graham for his tight end. The other tight end he has is O.J. Howard on his bench. But, Buffalo, besides last week, and it's hard for Buffalo's defense was kind of, after last week, they're overrated this week. Because we already talked about Kirk Cousins having 5 turnovers, and I believe that their running backs had another fumble, so that's 6 turnovers. That's going to make their defense, Buffalo's defense, look a lot better. I'm looking for Jimmy Graham to at least get probably 5 catches, maybe 60 yards, and if he has a touchdown, that's just icing on the cake. I mean, so he's averaging 6 points a game this week. The first week he didn't do much, but the last week, 2 weeks after that, 6 catches for 95 yards and then 5 for 45. So it's not out of the realm for him to get 5 catches for 50 yards, and if he gets a touchdown, that's just extra. For flex, this is really an amazing player so far this year. Juju, we've already talked about on this podcast versus Baltimore. He should have an amazing game. And then the Vikings defense minus 8.5 points. For his kicker, he's got Vinatieri for Indy playing Houston. He should have a decent game. I think he's probably going to get 8 to 10 points. So I'm not going to pick Stairway to Evans in this game, though. I just don't like Peyton Barber. And then Jimmy Graham is touchdown dependent, but it's gonna be pretty close. Witch Hunt No Collusion, though, sadly had Jared Goff on his bench with 43 points, so that does not help him.
Yeah, 43 fantasy points on the bench hurts, but I see the reasoning. When you have Aaron Rodgers, you start him every week, especially against Buffalo, who looked good on defense last week, but I think that game was a complete and total fluke. I don't think Aaron Rodgers will see 43 fantasy points this week like Jared Goff did, but if he sees 25 fantasy points, I think you're honestly perfectly happy with that. You wish you had those extra 20 points from Jared Goff, but 25 from Aaron Rodgers, not nearly out of the realm of possibility. Very, very likely to happen, in my opinion. Kareem Hunt at his running back position, who finally put it together last week. Looks like Kansas City was like, hey, we have a good running back. We should kind of run the ball, I think. And they ran the ball a lot more, and he got, let's see how many fantasy points he got last week. He was sitting on 16 fantasy points last week and 13.5 the week before. I hope you're not dying over there. Austin Eckler at RB2. Austin Eckler had an amazing first 2 weeks and then slowed down last week. He's against the Niners defense.
It's a good matchup.
Yeah, it's a good matchup, and especially because by the second half, the Chargers could be up by quite a few points. It's really C.J. Beathard dependent and how well he does this week. But he didn't look great last year, so I'm not holding out any hope that we are even competitive in this game whatsoever. So Eckler could have a slow first half and a big second half just because he gets more touches. Kenny Galladay at wide receiver 1, not a great wide receiver 1. Honestly, Kenny Galladay is a nice player, and he's had a pretty good year so far. He's sitting at the 11th overall ranked wide receiver, but I do expect Marvin Jones to start getting more of those targets at some point, and that point could be this week. I like Kenny Galladay, however, and I think he's set up for a good 10 to 12 fantasy points. Sammy Watkins really, really blew up last week, mainly in the rushing game of all things. He had quite a few rushing plays, and I think he had something like 50 or 55 rushing yards, which got him an extra 5 fantasy points. Austin Seferian-Jenkins at tight end. I don't really have anything to say about him. He's not a great tight end, and this isn't really a great matchup for him against the Jets defense. I probably would have dropped him for any other tight end, maybe a Vance McDonald or someone this week. Alshon Jeffrey at the flex. I traded Alshon Jeffrey to Witch Hunt No Collusion. Alshon Jeffrey should have a really, really good game as long as he starts and isn't limited at all due to the injury he's recovering from. With Carson Wentz back at quarterback, Alshon Jeffrey should see 15 to 16, maybe up to 18 targets, should see 100 receiving yards, maybe a touchdown. He is a red zone threat. The Seahawks defense against Arizona is a good matchup for them. And then Robbie Gould, we've talked about him in the past, one of the best fantasy kickers in the game. I like Witch Hunt No Collusion in this game, but I'm going to pick Stairway to Evans because of his trio of wide receivers. Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, and Juju Smith-Schuster. I think you're looking at 60 fantasy points from just those 3 alone right there. If I were him, I would be dropping Peyton Barber right now for anyone else I could get on waivers. I was high on Peyton Barber before the season, but the Buccaneers have just completely abandoned the run altogether, and they're relying on Fitzpatrick's arm, and it has been working so far. So I don't expect them to suddenly abandon that strategy this week and start running the ball. I think Peyton Barber will see 5 fantasy points this week, and it's just not someone you want to start at running back. Corey Clement, even a Tavon Austin. Nyheim Hines has had a nice little role in that offense this year. Any of those 3, I think, is a better choice than Peyton Barber is. Drop anyone on your bench or Peyton Barber and pick up one of those and start them, in my opinion. But outside of that, this is a pretty solid team. He is 8.5 points in the hole, and I still expect him to win this game.
Yeah, I mean, with 8.5, he's only projected to lose by 3. So that's just telling you how much better his team is.
It's crazy.
So, I mean, there's a reason he's 3-0. So, but I guess I'm going with the underdog and one with Witch Hunt in this game. So we'll move on to the next one. So it's Tobias Anal Rapist versus Dalvin and the Chipmunks. So I'll start off by Tobias Anal Rapist. So right now he is projected to win by 17 points.
Holy
versus
crap.
Dalvin and the Chipmunks. Let's see what he's working with. So luckily, okay. Yeah, I think he might have traded him away. So he's got Carson Wentz starting this week. I know he didn't last week, and he has no other quarterback on his bench, so he must have got rid of his other quarterback. Carson Wentz versus Tennessee. It's only going to go up for Carson Wentz. And against Tennessee, this is a great matchup. Tennessee, yeah, he held Blake Bortles and the Jacksonville offense without Leonard Fournette. Okay, so the Titans are ranked 12th so far this year in defense. But, yeah, Carson Wentz should have a great week this week. And so to go back on not Nelson Aguilar, who's the receiver we were just
Alshon Jeffrey.
So Alshon Jeffrey, he was out today from practice, but it was because he was sick. It was an illness. It wasn't an injury. They said he is fully healthy from his injury. So I am looking for him to have a big part, and you know Carson Wentz loves to throw the ball to him. He's got Zeke versus Detroit. Detroit's defense hasn't done much. I know that they played New England, so that's kind of an iffy running back. defense or running back offense to go against. But yeah, right now Detroit is ranked 29th in the league in total. So Zeke Elliott should have a really good game. Dak Prescott really hasn't turned the corner, so they are still feeding him the ball. Like he says, feed Zeke. They should do that. Jalen Richard is his starting running back out of Oakland versus Cleveland. I really don't know too much about him. I know he had a pretty good preseason, but behind Marshawn Lynch, let's see what he's had so far this year.
Very boomer bust so far.
Yeah, let's.
If Jalen Richard is not catching a lot of passes, he's not putting up a lot of fantasy points. He had 11.5 points in week 1, catching quite a few balls. 0 points against Denver, where he just did nothing. He had 2 carries for 3 yards, and I don't think was targeted at all. And against Miami last week, had some nice catches and put up 8 fantasy points on 0 rushing attempts. So he is purely dependent on pass catching.
Yeah, and he's got Devontae Freeman on his bench. I know Devontae Freeman's been backed up, but he is expected to be back on a limited basis. I would start him over Jalen Richard.
Yeah, 100%.
This week. So if you're listening, switch him out. That could help you win even more because I haven't said it so far, but I'm going to pick the Annual Rapists to win this week. So then you got Golden Tate versus Dallas. We already talked about Sean Lee being out, so that only helps Detroit's passing offense. Jarvis Landry versus Oakland. Oakland got tore up last week. They haven't been able to stop anyone so far, and with Baker Mayfield starting, that should help the offense as a whole. So Jarvis Landry's value is going to go up. Travis Kelce, he had an amazing week last week versus Denver, and he's playing Denver this week. But last week, let's see what he had. He had 15 points. He had 8 catches for 114 yards. Like, for your tight end, that is amazing. He is ranked number 1 over the year, and that is help with his week 2 where he had 25.5 points, but it kind of evens out. He's averaging 13.7 points a game, so that is amazing. That is solid. He is a great tight end in that slot. He's got Will Fuller versus Indianapolis, which they're going to have to put their best corner on DeAndre Hopkins, so Will Fuller should have a good game. He usually, last year, he was really big play, touchdown dependent. It's kind of trending towards that, but he is getting more of the medium pass catches, the 10 to 15 or even 20-yard pass catches from Deshaun Watson, so it is helping him. He is averaging 13 points a game, which is pretty decent for a flex position. So I am liking that matchup. And then the Packers defense versus Buffalo, I'm going to have to see if Josh Allen's going to be hurdling players again. They should not be rolling like they were last week. And it is home for the Packers, so they're not going to have to deal with playing in Buffalo. And then as far as New England's kicker versus Miami's defense, so Miami's defense could give issues to New England's offense because New England has not looked right so far this entire season, and Miami's defense is actually a surprise. So Gostkowski could have a good game. They might not be getting in the red zone as much. So as far as kicks, he might be getting a lot of kicks this game, so I like the matchup for him.
Yeah, going off Tobias Anderson, I think if they start Devonta Freeman over Jalen Richard here, they have a very, very good shot at winning. Dalvin and the Chipmunks, I'll go over his team. He has been trying to trade anyone and everyone on his team. I don't know if his goal this year is simply trade everyone multiple times and just see how it goes, but he is 2-1, so he's been doing pretty well. He's starting Patrick Mahomes at quarterback against Denver. This is in Denver. This is the best defense Patrick Mahomes has seen so far. They have very, very good cornerbacks and a very, very good pass rush. So this could be the game where Patrick Mahomes kind of comes back down to earth. I think that's why Dalvin the Chipmunks has been trying to trade him. Dalvin Cook, who his team is named after, got 2 fantasy points this week. That start was rough. I would have started Cook in this matchup because it was rumored that he was going to be a full participant, but it just didn't work out that way. But, I mean, just bad luck with the 2 fantasy points. Jay Ajayi versus Tennessee. Tennessee has been, they're 3rd overall in the league right now against opposing running backs. Jay Ajayi was banged up last week, and Philadelphia has already moved to sort of a running back by committee with Corey Clement. I don't like this matchup for Jay Ajayi whatsoever, who he recently just traded for as well, and gave up Tevin Coleman, I believe, right?
No, so I actually traded Jay Ajayi to him for Phillip Lindsay.
For Phillip Lindsay, okay.
Yeah,
I really do not like this matchup for Ajayi, I kind of like Ajayi's rest of the season outlook, but not this week.
Yeah, it's kind of rough with Ajayi, which I'm glad that I got rid of him, that I traded for him and got a pretty good return for him, because reports have came out that he's playing with a fractured spine right now.
Whew, that's rough.
For a running back, that is not good.
Yeah.
So you always worry about his knees when his knees are going to explode, because in the combine it was reported and actually confirmed that his knees, he has no cartilage. It's bone on bone. So injury concerns are always with Jay Ajayi. But now a running back playing with a fractured spine, that is not good.
Yeah, so this could be a huge Corey Clement game simply because Ajayi might see a lot less touches than Dalvin and the Chipmunks are expecting. DeAndre Hopkins against Indy. Indy has been, let's see, they're second overall in the league so far against opposing wide receivers. That's including games against Cincinnati and Philadelphia. That's actually really impressive and a huge mark for the Colts wide receivers. DeAndre Hopkins was the best fantasy wide receiver last year, but he's also questionable, so he's a little banged up. This could be a big game for Will Fuller, who's on the opposing team.
Yeah.
So DeAndre Hopkins, I think, is boom or bust in this situation. Then he's got Allen Robinson against Tampa Bay. This is one matchup I really, really like because I think this game will be a shootout. Mitchell Trubisky hasn't been a great quarterback so far this year and may not be a great quarterback for the rest of his career, honestly. But this is one of those games where you could see him throw 3 or 4 touchdowns simply because he's against Tampa Bay, who is not a great defense. Let's see, they are 29th overall against opposing wide receivers. We've seen what Allen Robinson can do in the past, and this could be the game this season where he really, really breaks out. George Kittle against the Chargers. If the Niners are going to get anything going on offense, it's going to be with George Kittle. He was actually C.J. Beathard's, the Niners' now starting quarterback. They were roommates in college. They played on the same team. They have a great rapport, great chemistry, and Kittle has looked really, really good so far this year. I think this is his best starting player so far. Then Demaryius Thomas, who he has tried to trade multiple times, is starting in his flex. And honestly, he's had a pretty solid season so far. He's averaging 9 points a game, which for your flex spot isn't horrible. And it's against Kansas City, which this game could be very, very high scoring, just simply based on the fact that Kansas City's defense isn't all that good and their offense really is very good. So Demaryius Thomas could be due for a big game here, and I sort of expect him to score at least 12 fantasy points here. The Bears' defense has been very, very underrated so far. They are the number 1 overall ranked defense. Props to Khalil Mack. What a trade that was for them, but they're against Tampa Bay. It's at home for Chicago, which is nice, but Ryan Fitzpatrick has looked dominant, which is just weird to say. Even throwing 3 picks last week, he still had over 400 yards passing. It's absolutely absurd. So this could be the week where we see the Bears defense kind of fall off. And then Harrison Butker at kicker, who is a solid overall kicker. I mean, it's Kansas City's kicker. They score a lot of touchdowns. They're in the red zone a lot, so he could see a lot of extra points and a lot of field goals. This could be a solid game for him, as it has been every week. In this matchup, I think I'm also going to pick the Tobias Anal Rapists. They are 17-point favorites in the projections right now, which is just absurd. So this might be a gimme, but because it looks like that, we could see Dalvin and the Chipmunks win this game.
Yeah, I mean, with Dalvin and the Chipmunks, the potential, just his running backs are what turned me off. Dalvin Cook only got 2 points, and Jay Ajayi with that back injury. Say he gets 10 points, only getting 12 points out of 2 starting running backs is not good.
Yeah, that's insane.
So he is starting off rough with Dalvin Cook not having a good game tonight. And then I believe this is the last matchup of the week.
Yes, it is.
So neither team had any players playing in this Thursday night game, so it's a fresh game for us. So wide right versus Jimmy G and the Jimmy G Spot Rockers. So I'll start to talk about wide right. So he's got Matt Ryan playing Cincinnati. Matt Ryan played amazing the last 2 weeks, honestly. And for Cincinnati, I think that's a good matchup for him. He has weapons. We already talked about Julio Jones being more healthy than he was last week. So Matt Ryan is the number 4 overall scoring quarterback so far this year. He's averaging 25 points a game, which I know he scored 39 last week, so his numbers are a little overrated. But I mean, Matt Ryan, you have to start him. He has a great matchup this week, especially because Cam Newton's on his bench. And this is when buys start. We didn't talk about this a little earlier. Bye weeks are starting already. So you're going to have to move your starting lineups around just for buys. You might have to drop players just because you need to fill in a spot. You don't want to have an empty slot. So he's got Cam Newton on his bench. But I mean, Cam Newton and Matt Ryan, yes, that's a pretty good, that's a great quarterback decision to have. So Matt Ryan, definitely a decent start. Giovanni Bernard. So Joe Mixon is still out. So against Atlanta, with them being down 3 starters so far, that is a good matchup as well. Tevin Coleman, he has really stepped up with Devontae Freeman being out. I think Devontae Freeman, is he supposed to be back this week?
Yes, he is. He's questionable right now and has participated in practice.
Okay, so Tevin Coleman's value might go down a little bit, but he actually relies a lot out of the pass-catching game, so that shouldn't go down at all. Looking for at least 10 points from him. Antonio Brown versus Baltimore. We already said this is going to be a high-scoring game. I know it is divisional, but they're in Pittsburgh, and looking for him to have one of the normal Antonio Brown games. T.Y. Hilton versus Houston. T.Y. Hilton is Andrew Luck's go-to player. Let's see what he's done so far this year. So he's averaging 12.5 points, which is pretty good. You'd like a lot. You'd like for your starting wide receivers to get to, I would say, at least 15 points a game. He's top 30 though so far for fantasy in the wide receivers. Last week he had a little bit of down week, so this season has been touchdown dependent. First week 5 catches, 46 yards, and a touchdown. That touchdown helped. The second week 7 catches for 83 yards and a touchdown, so more yards. But last week he only had 5 catches for 50 yards and no touchdown. So he only had 7.5 points last week. He needs to get a touchdown this week against Houston. Tyler Eifert, I don't like him. Not personally, but as a player, just because he can't stay healthy. And Cincinnati actually started throwing to their other tight end, which I don't even know his name.
Chad Uzama.
Yeah. They started to trend to throwing him the ball over Tyler Eifert last week. Tyler Eifert still did get 6 catches for 74 yards for 10 points, which that's decent, but you'd like to get more out of your starting tight end. Randall Cobb, we've kind of talked about last podcast on how Geronimo Allison and Randall Cobb are kind of trading that wide receiver 2 name, air quotes, for Green Bay, but going against Buffalo's defense, they don't have anyone as far as corners goes. We talked about White, and he should be matched up with Devontae Adams. So this could be a big game for Randall Cobb or Geronimo Allison. So flex, he could get 12 to 16 points in this game, so pretty decent for him. The Eagles are playing Tennessee, which Tennessee, nothing's gone right for them so far. One of their wide receivers, Rashard Matthews, just asked to be released from the team this week. So something's wrong in that locker room for that offense. So Eagles, I like this matchup. And then Justin Tucker, he's Justin Tucker playing against Pittsburgh. It's either Baltimore's not going to be able to get in the red zone, so he's going to get a lot of points, or Pittsburgh defense hasn't not been good so far this year, and they're going to score a lot of points, so then Justin Tucker will get a lot of points.
Yeah, it's a great matchup for Tucker. I'd say the one weak spot on this team I honestly think is Randall Cobb here, because he has LaShawn McCoy and Royce Freeman on his bench. I think either one of those is a better start over Cobb here, because Cobb's past 2 weeks have been absolutely abysmal. For LaShawn McCoy, if the Bills are going to do anything this week, it's going to be on the back of LaShawn McCoy. So I think that's the obvious start here, but Royce Freeman against Kansas City. Kansas City's defense has been horrible. This game could be an absolute shootout yet again, or the Broncos could be up by 14 at halftime and just rely on running the ball quite a bit. So you could see Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman have good games.
Yeah, and I mean, Wide Right is a Buffalo Bills player or fan, so you definitely have to put in McCoy this week. Good notice. I didn't see that on the bench.
Moving on to the Jimmy G Spot Rockers, they're starting Drew Brees at quarterback, who has been one of the best fantasy quarterbacks this year so far. He is number 2 overall, right behind Patrick Mahomes, I believe. Yeah. He is in a pretty good matchup against the Giants. Honestly, they are 19th overall against opposing quarterbacks, and they haven't seen an offense nearly as good as the Saints offense. They've played Jacksonville, Dallas, and Houston. Houston has a nice offense, and Deshaun Watson put up 24 points. Deshaun Watson is not on Drew Brees' level, and their offense is not on the Saints' level. Drew Brees is probably due for 25 to 30 fantasy points in this matchup, honestly. I know no ESPN projection will ever go that high, but I think he's honestly due for 25 to 30 fantasy points here. Alex Collins at running back. One of the concerning things I read this week was an interview on the radio with the offensive coordinator for the Ravens. He came out and said that, look, we like Javorius Allen over Alex Collins on the goal line. So Alex Collins, while he does get the most touches and the most yards, he doesn't see the goal line work. And that's been fairly proven so far this year. Buck Allen had 2 touchdowns last week because he is their goal line back. So unless Alex Collins puts up 100 rushing yards this week, I just don't think he gives you the fantasy points that you really want to see. But what is really nice, in his RB2 slot, he has Kerryon Johnson. Kerryon Johnson, I dropped a couple weeks ago. That what I think was a mistake. He was the Lions' first 100-yard rusher in something like 3 years or something like that.
Since 2013. It was Reggie Bush. 5 years.
So it's been 5 years since the Lions had a 100-yard rusher, and Kerryon Johnson, who was one of the most talented running backs in this past draft, finally did it. If they don't start feeding him the ball every single game, they clearly don't know what they're doing up there. They fed him fairly well last week. He had 16 rushes for 101 yards and 11 fantasy points, and he hasn't had a touchdown this year. So this week against Dallas's defense could be the week that he sees at least 80 rushing yards and a touchdown and looks like the RB1 he was drafted to be. Odell Beckham Jr. against the Saints. If the Giants want to stay competitive in this game at all, they have to throw the ball to Odell Beckham Jr. nearly every single down, so I think he's a very, very good start. Keenan Allen hasn't looked like himself in the past couple weeks. Week 1, he looked really good, but this Niners defense is a cure-all for wide receivers. Keenan Allen could absolutely explode this week. Good start there. Zach Ertz at tight end is a must-start every single week. He's one of Carson Wentz's favorite targets. Boom. Good to go there. Yep. And his flexi is Sony Michel, who we spoke about earlier that we're not a huge fan of. On his bench, he has Kenyon Drake and Ted Ginn Jr. I'd honestly be starting either one of them over Sony Michel here. Sony Michel, let's see, last week when he finally played a decent amount of snaps, he had 14 rushes for 50 yards and 5.5 points. That's not great. No. James White is still the primary pass-catching back in that offense, so Michel hasn't taken over that role yet. And it's really just trying to pick your poison on which running back is going to get the most rushing attempts in that offense, and it doesn't look like it's really Sony Michel yet. So I would be starting Kenyon Drake or Ted Ginn Jr. over him. I'd be leaning heavily towards Kenyon Drake, though. The Texans' defense against the Colts. Texas defense so far this year is averaging 8.8 games per 8.8 points per game. They're looking like a fairly solid overall defense. As long as J.J. Watt is healthy and looking good, I think they're a solid start. Not amazing. They're not going to get you 20 to 30 fantasy points like they have in previous years, but a solid start against a Colts offense that doesn't fully trust Andrew Luck yet. And then Randy Bullock at kicker. We've spoken at length about Randy Bullock already. Let's see how he's done so far this year. Right now, he is the 13th overall ranked kicker, so there is 12 teams in this league. So by those standards, Randy Bullock is not a starting level kicker. He's averaging 8.3 points per game, which is solid, but he only had 3 last week. So if Cincinnati finds themselves, not really kicking a lot of field goals and just scoring a lot of touchdowns, this is not going to be Randy Bullock's week.
Yeah.
In this matchup, I am picking wide right over the Jimmy G Spot Rockers.
Yeah, so as am I. I didn't mention that with my breakdown. So I would actually make 2 potential moves if I was Jimmy G Spot. We talked about how we don't like Alex Collins and Sony Michel. I would put Kenyon Drake in your running back starting position because Kerryon Johnson was a 100-yard rusher against New England's defense. That's either saying that New England's defense is really bad or Kerryon Johnson is as good as he was coming out of the draft. I think Kerryon Johnson and Kenyon Drake are pretty much on the same level.
Yeah, I think so.
You could say that. So there's no reason to think that Kenyon Drake won't get... I'm not going to say he's going to have the same production, but he's going to get at least 80 yards, and he is a pass catcher out of the backfield, which Kerryon Johnson is not. So I am looking for him to have a pretty good week this week. And then Ted Ginn, I'd throw him in your flex. He is touchdown dependent, but I'm not trusting Sony Michel right now. So if you make those 2 moves, this is going to be a lot closer game. If you make those 2 moves, you will win this game. I'm saying that. But right now, looking at your roster, I'm picking wide right.
The problem with this is the Jimmy G Spot Rockers owner does not have a Facebook, and so he probably doesn't even know that this podcast exists. I'll text the link to him, though, and hopefully he listens to it and makes those moves.
So,
but yeah, that is it for our pick so far. Do you have anything else to bring up?
So I was just going to say, so we have been posting this podcast through SoundCloud. So unfortunately, we have reached their max limit for their free subscription. So we are starting to post this on our our YouTube channel. So we will be sending the link out to our fantasy league. But if you do want to listen to it, if you want to spread it around, I think it's your profile that it's on.
It's one of my profiles. I made this profile specifically for the fantasy podcast. I know this is said by every YouTuber out there, but please like, comment, and subscribe. Subscribe so that you don't have to hear through Facebook when we post it. You'll just know immediately. Boom, it's uploaded. It's ready to go. You can listen to it. Comment so we have more things to talk about on this podcast. Anything you want us to talk about, please comment a question or something, and we will go over it. And then like it just because I want you to like us.
Yeah, definitely those comments help. We've started to post in our Facebook group saying, hey, what do you guys like? What do you want to hear? We added these Reddit trade talks this week to try and mix it up a little bit. That way it's not the same, okay, we're looking at this week's matchups. Okay, we're going to go over this past week's matchups. We're trying to add something new in there. So yeah, let us know what you think. Subscribe, and I think that's all we got for today. I'm Matt Bowen.
And I'm Daniel Powell, and always remember, 2 assholes are better than 1.